Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night at the local time. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. First we're going to talk about the massive missile and drone strike that took place during the previous night. As you can see, according to this map, the Russians mainly were bombing the central part of Ukraine. According to Ukrainian sources, there were explosions in Kryvyi Rog, in Dnipro, in Zaporozhye, in Mirgorod, Poltava, in Kiev, and in Vinnytsia, and most likely the Russians were trying to get and destroy the airfields of the armed forces of Ukraine, because according to information we have, this summer or by the end of the summer the Western countries promised to send Ukraine F-16s. So now the Russians are trying to hunt the Ukraine airfields, aircrafts, and not allow the Western countries to do that. Furthermore, we have additional updates for some photos and video geolocations. In the vicinity of Odessa we have a very big fire anomaly. Most likely the Russians destroyed some S-300 system. There was explosions in the vicinity of Kryvyi Rog. Maybe the Russians were attacking and destroying some energy facilities, and we have the results of strikes inside of Dnipro. Some ammo depot was also destroyed as a result of Russian fire. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We have additional updates, and first we're going to talk about South Donetsk direction, where the situation with encircled Ukrainians continues. As you can see, we have a lot of geolocations. Some of them are about, let's say, from Ukrainian side, some of them from the Russian side. Let's talk first about the Ukrainians. According to information we have that we received from the Ukrainian sources, as a result of clashes in the vicinity of Vladimirovka, the Ukrainian soldiers managed to break through the blockade, break through the encirclement, and to withdraw their positions towards the mainland in direction of Vadiana. I'll remind you that according to information we have, these Ukrainians were encircled there. There were very heavy clashes, and Ukrainians during the previous period of time suffered significant losses. The situation probably been taking place for the previous week or something like this. On the other hand, we have additional videos of Russian progress. In this video we can see a lonely storm of Russian motor assault trooper. He was moving along the tree line in direction of Ukrainian positions. We have a lot of details about this attack, some even explanations from the soldier itself. He reported that he was alone, and he was alone trying to attack the Ukrainian positions. And according to him, as a result of attack, he managed to capture the entire network of fortifications in this area. And according to information we have, he's been holding this territory for 8 days without any supply and support from the mainland. He said that he was drinking water. He was drinking the water of rain, and he was eating the food that he managed to find in the nearby abandoned Ukrainian positions. So once again, as a result of one motorcycle attack, one motorcycle trooper attack, the Russians were controlling the territory for 8 days until the main forces arrived. As you can see now, this is very important positions. There are two fortifications that were discovered. This is the first fortification, this is the second, and the clashes are taking place for this territory. And probably the Russians were controlling this territory, but the Ukrainians, as a result of counteroffensive, managed to force the Russians to fall back and to allow the Ukrainians to leave the part of fields in the northern part of Volodymyrovka. Now let's move further to Georgievka. We have additional reports and additional confirmation from different mappers about additional Russian progress to the south of Georgievka. I'll remind you that currently the Russians are focused in demining and clearing this territory from mines. So there are lots of minefields that the Russians need to clear before moving further in direction of Korakhovo, Maximilianovka, and in direction of Antonovka, Katerinovka, and Konstantinovka. So there are lots of job to do. The third day in a row we are not receiving any updates from Krasnogorovka. Finally, we receive geolocated confirmation of Russian progress in the southern part of Yasnobrodovka, in the northern part of Karlovka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. From now on, this territory is considered as a territory under Russian control. We have just 2 geolocations from this area. In this video, we can see the movement of Ukrainian vehicle who was evacuating their forces from this territory towards the mainland, but as a result of FPV drone strike, that vehicle was damaged and destroyed. And later we got another video from the Russian side, how the Russians, using armored personnel carrier, were storming the Ukrainian positions, also under very heavy fire of Ukrainian FPV drones. The video was published by the 25th Brigade, and the episodes from that video were geolocated in this part. So based based on that video, we can make a conclusion that the Russians captured this territory completely, and once again the Russians are getting closer and closer to finish the battle for Yasnobrodovka-Karlovka area. As for Novoselovka-Persha, as you can see, we continue receiving significant number of geolocations of how the Russians were hunting and destroying the Ukrainian armored vehicles. So the final battle for village has started. The Ukrainians suffer significant losses. They try to evacuate armored vehicles, but as we can see, they suffer once again significant losses. If we increase the numbers since the beginning of months, we're gonna find maybe even already 100 of episodes or cases of successful Russian attack with FPV drone on Ukrainian let's say armored vehicles and vehicles of Western production. During the previous night, we got another confirmation of Russian presence inside of Novoalexandrovka. In this video that was published by the Ukrainians, we can see the movements of Russian soldiers in the most northern geolocated area of Novoalexandrovka, and the Russian soldiers were heading and moving to were under very heavy fire of armored forces of Ukraine, and the Russians were moving towards Vozdvizhenka. So now we have 100% confirmation of control over this territory, yet we haven't received any geolocations confirming that the Russians control this part of fields and this part as well. As for Donetsk, after a very loud beginning of offensive operation that was, let's say, announced by the Ukrainian sources, we stopped receiving any updates. The only report we got during the previous 24 hours is that Ukrainians, as a result of different actions, as a result of redeployment of forces, managed to stabilize the situation and that the Russians were stopped. So once again, very interesting offensive. And for example, the Ukrainians were the source who reported about the beginning of Russian offensive in Donetsk direction. The Ukrainians were the source who reported about the very difficult situation, and the Ukrainians is the source who reported today that the situation was stabilized. When talking about the Russians, they haven't provided us any updates about the current status of this offensive. So once again, I'm not even sure whether this offensive was or not. It seems that Ukrainians created a media victory, so that they managed to repel attack and to stabilize the situation without any evidence. As for Chasiv Yar, as you can see, we got a lot of geolocations. Most of them are coming from Kalinovka. This is the part of village of Chasiv Yar direction along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal in the northern part. We have a lot of geolocations, we have a lot of videos. Most of them were published by the Ukrainians, and most of them confirms additional Russian progress, or at least the losses that the Russians suffered exactly along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal. We will not watch this video till the end due to the losses and casualties. Once again, if you have access to map, you're gonna see the personnel Russian carrier that was destroyed in this part, which also confirms the Russian progress and Russian control. Most likely the personnel carrier was destroyed after the carrier was abandoned by the Russian infantry. Along this Lisova Street, we have also lots of geolocations of FPV drone strikes of the armed forces of Ukraine on Russian forces, which also confirms Russian control over this territory. As for Razdolovka, Sivers direction, during the previous night we haven't received anything. More and more updates are coming from Barova area. If you remember, a few days ago, Deep State pro-Ukraine mappers reported about the concentration of Russian forces in this direction, and that the Russians are about to start their greatest offensive operation on the line Svatovo-Barov with the purpose to cut this territory in two. Ukrainian sources published the map of the fortifications, of the rich network of the fortifications in this area, and telling the truth, there are significant number of strongholds and many other different shelters and so on, and I'm not sure how the Russians are planning to capture this territory with 10,000 soldiers, so it's going to be obviously very difficult operation, but we see the concentration of forces. Now let's wait whether the Russians are planning to do anything or not. But regarding the question whether the Russians are planning to do anything or not, we have videos confirming that the Russians destroying the Ukrainian logistic in this area. This is the dam, this is the bridge in Askoyskaya water reservoir, and as a result of strike, that reservoir was damaged and destroyed once again. The Russians are pretty focused, but as you can see, regarding the Russian strike, the dam managed to survive, so the Ukrainians managed to reinforce this area, but anyway, the Russians would try to do their best and to reduce the supply and support that the Ukrainians have in this area. So everything tells us that maybe the Russians are planning to do something. As for Pishane, according to information we have, the Russians entered the village, and now this yesterday we were talking that this village is already in the gray zone, but according to the latest reports, the Russians managed to enter, and from now on the village is no longer in the gray zone. This is the contested area. I believe that the Russians captured the part of Pishane that located to the south of Pishane River, and most likely the Ukrainians control the northern part with farms and some fortifications. Anyway, the battle has started, but for now without any geolocations confirming this. As for Kharkiv direction, we have additional update from the group of forces north. They gave us very interesting details. First of all, before we continue, as you can see, we have adjusted the map and we have returned control over the borderlines in the vicinity of Marina and over this forest under Ukraine control. We have the same report and some kind of confirmation of the same type from neutral mappers, and we completely agree because they were reporting in the past about the Russian control over this territory, but for the previous months and more, we still haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of Russian presence there. So that's why we have adjusted the map back, and now this territory from now on is already also under Ukraine control. As for Vovchansk itself, for the first time since the beginning of the battle for aggregate plant, the Russian sources haven't provided us any details about the status in this plant. Maybe the Russians have already captured the territory, so that's why they haven't provided us anything. Maybe the situation is not so good. Anyway, we have additional videos from the Ukrainian side of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces who were moving from one building to another inside of the northern part. As you can see, the town was already reduced to ruins. So there is, let's say, almost nothing left, just ruins, and the clashes are taking place exactly for the ruins. Also, important statement let's say we can add from the group of forces north. The only detail they provide us about the current status is that currently the Russians are trying to capture and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this forest, from this small forest that located in the southern part of the northern Volchansk. So this is the main Russian priority. They try to reduce and to cut the last supply in the southern part of northern Vovchansk, because if you remember, according to geolocations, the Ukrainians still have possibilities to send forces from the southern part to the northern part using this road. So now the Russians want to reduce these possibilities, and after that they will be able to finish the battle for this part of the town. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost a significant number of forces just during the process of evacuation, rotation of personnel. Up to 60 soldiers lost their lives from Ukrainian side in this area. As for Liptsi, the Ukrainians reduced their activity, reduced their number of forces involved in massive storm attacks during the previous day. Just 15 soldiers, just few attacks with the number of 15 soldiers were involved in those attacks. Most of them were repelled by the Russians. Anyway, regarding reduce of some activity from the Ukrainian side in this direction, the Russians are saying that the concentration of forces continues, and that Ukrainians just don't understand and don't know exactly where to attack. As soon as they find the direction, the Ukrainians will start their counterattacks in Vovchansk. As for political events, one of the most important is that during the previous few days, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russian Federation, visited lots of countries. He visited Korea, and after today we got report that Vladimir Putin is coming to Vietnam. And we have already, let's say, the videos and photos how Vladimir Putin arrived in the area, and most likely the Russians are trying to get as many as possible ammunition deals with the countries with the weapon producers in the world. Most likely the Russians understand that in the near future there are going to be very heavy clashes, and probably the Russians begin preparation for another offensive operation in Ukraine. And if you remember the last time Russia had such negotiations with different countries in the world, the Russians managed to finish successfully the battle for Avdiivka. Most likely the munitions that they bought as a result of those the last year trips has ended, and now they need to restore their stocks, their munition, their ammo depots before the beginning of the next offensive. And most likely the next offensive is going to be somewhere in Kharkiv or maybe in Sumy area. Most likely Putin will sign every single necessary agreement with Vietnam and Korea, and then he will return back to Russia, and after, as soon as he returns, some offensive in Ukraine is going to start. And that's it for today. Military Summer Channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.